here is Mick Wallace. He's responding to the EU and NATO claim that China doesn't respect their rules. And here is his response.
Mr. Stoltenberg, NATO has been vocal in identifying China as a threat. The Vilnius Summit Declaration states that China is trying to subvert the so-called rules-based international order and criticizes China for being opaque about its strategy and intentions. Now, my first question is, how is it possible to subvert an order that has no constitution, no basis whatsoever in international law? And if you think it does, in fact, appeal to or have a standing in international law, why then do NATO and NATO members repeatedly violate international law without any consequence? Yugoslavia, Iraq, Afghanistan, Syria, Libya, for example. China has not illegally invaded and bombed a sovereign country in over 40 years, while the US and our allies have hardly stopped in the same period, killing millions of civilians, displacing millions more, and illegally sanctioning dozens of countries to the point where tens of thousands of men, women, and children are extrajudicially executed each year for simply existing in a country targeted by Western imperialism. Is it not time to return to multilateral international forums based on diplomacy and international law, like China has repeatedly urged the US to do?
We don't regard China as an adversary.
All right. We don't need to see Jens Stoltenberg's ridiculous response, but Mick Wallace has great points there about apparently NATO's law and EU law has no impact because the US and NATO violate it all the time. They're bombing all the time. They're invading countries all the time. People are dying every single day. Tens of thousands of bombs dropped by the US. Never stop. So for them to turn around and say, oh, China needs to obey our laws, it's like, well, clearly, A, you don't obey those laws, even slightly, not for a second. But on top of that, China's not the one invading countries all over the place. China's not the one that drops tens of thousands of bombs a year. China's not the one with 800 military bases around the world. So maybe you should address that first. Maybe.